once it's actually recording. All right, there we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the weTHINK UAV UGV Emerging Threats and Uninhabited Systems Emerging Threats Working Group and War Game Weekly Video Update. Today we have Dr. Kerry Shaw, because last time I think I missed the doctor. So if you just want to introduce yourself, and then I'll give a little bit of an introduction about our project.
Sure. So this isn't my first appearance on here, but I am Dr. Kerry Chavez. I'm currently at Texas Tech University and the Peace, War, and Social Conflict Lab, and I'm a fellow at the Modern War Institute at West Point. And I do a lot of work on commercial drones and their exploitation by violent non-state actors.
Cool. And thank you again for coming on. I know it was last minute. And so basically what the recap of weTHINK UAV, UGV, Uninhabited, Unmanned Systems, Emerging Threats Working Group, that is a mouthful to say every time. What we are doing is we're exploring the emerging threats from all uninhabited systems. And how are we doing that? We're creating a working group with researchers, practitioners, even some manufacturers, and there are a couple of policymakers there as well to discuss and identify what those emerging threats are, and then develop a sort of strategy or best practices using the shared knowledge and experience of all of those researchers, practitioners, manufacturers, and policymakers that are in the working group. But more importantly, more recently, we have been working with our partners who I won't list the whole list, but we have Kerry Chavez, Dr. Kerry Chavez here, who's been doing a lot of work with us. And CART is one of our partners, and that's the Center for Advanced Red Teaming out of the State University of New York, University of Albany. And we're using the war game as an iterative series of war games to explore a variety of different threat vectors from the uninhabited or unmanned systems, however you prefer to describe them, with a specific focus on commercial off-the-shelf UAVs. And for the purposes of this discussion, I'll refer to commercial off-the-shelf as COTS UAVs. I think most of the people following this probably already know that. And so what we're doing now is we're conducting a survey, which is phase 2 of the war game. Phase 1 was, as we discussed in our original video, sort of an exploratory investigation into how the platform will work of a red team versus a blue team that were composed of the researchers, the practitioners in the field of unmanned systems and in security, defense, military, law enforcement, and another list of related fields. And our idea, I guess, for phase 2 is to have a crowdsourced red team. Yes. And I guess, why is that important? I think we've seen a lot of news coming up that could prove that. I mean, I'd be curious to hear from you, because I'm sure you could probably much more articulate. You could articulate it much clearer than I could at this time.
I can also say the word articulate, which is something.
That's how it's like, and use it in the correct context.
Yeah, so let me explain our rationale for this method. And the term survey is a little bit of a kind of a technical methods term for this case. I'm not sure that it's the most apt to explain to our audience what we're doing, because what we're actually doing is a red teaming exercise. And this phenomenon of violent non-state actors, of terrorists using COTS drones, and especially we're looking at urban settings where there are sensitive assets, sensitive infrastructure, and also larger populations, that obviously the collateral damage of these types of attacks could be much more egregious. So we're focusing on that to increase the resilience of EU and NATO member states against this emerging threat. Now, emerging threats, we are beginning to see an increase, an uptick in the threats, the statement of intent, attempts and a lot of them successful. So we're seeing this threat emerging, but we also don't have a lot of information about how it's likely to emerge, how it's likely to materialize. And so it's challenging to develop best responses with small and low quality data with few cases, because how it's going to converge and normalize, I mean, it could take a number of different pathways. And if we secure against one and we miss the big picture, then we've expended scarce resources and it didn't work. So at this point, when we have emerging threats, one of the best ways to generate data is to do wargaming. And so that's why we're trying to leverage this method. We want to understand how this threat is going to arise. We want to understand the most likely targets and the most likely attack vectors, because we do have a pretty significant field of counter-drone systems, but they don't always work in the same settings and they don't always work for the same purposes. And so we need to understand what is coming with this threat so that we can tailor suites of security provision in the most vulnerable and the highest sensitivity locations. In order to do that, we need to understand it. And that's exactly what this second phase is meant to do. We're asking participants to enter the headspace of a terrorist. We give one of 3 profiles randomized. And once they've internalized that animus, we ask them, now, what would you do? How would you do this? And the more participants we can get and the more variation we can get, the more valid and reliable our simulated data will be. And based on that, we can better develop these policies and standard operating procedures and these defense plans.
Yeah, it's interesting that you pointed out that, because I had a discussion this week with one of the ex-military now working in the field of UAV, and we were discussing CUAS, and we were in the context of the war in Ukraine and how effectively the level of innovation that's occurring between both sides, that occurred between both sides, whether they were civilian or military. And you have, since the beginning, I think, would it be correct to assume that the beginning of the armed CUAS UAV started coming out of Daesh, ISIS, were the first probably to really make it popular, right?
Yes and no. They were one of the most prolific with it, diverse uses, and also they were one of the earlier ones without state sponsorship that developed it indigenously. So I do think that Islamic State is a unique case, but we had actors, violent non-state actors, weaponizing long before they came on the scene. And I mean, their first weaponized use was in 2014. Hezbollah they've been using drones since the early 2000s. They were probably one of the best early on. They were the first to weaponize, the first to cause casualties with a munition dropped from a drone. And so I think all of that started around 2014, but there were other actors in the mix that were doing it. But, you mentioned the Russo-Ukrainian war and the innovation going on there, and there have been, Islamic State was a big one. There have been other war theaters, especially Libya and Syria, where we've seen actors innovating with these technologies. And with the attention on the Russo-Ukrainian war and the ways that especially the Ukrainian side has leveraged the full spectrum of drones, from the hobbyists donated by citizens all the way up to the Bayraktar, and how they're integrating them into their wider military whole of government effort. That conflict is kind of like a proving grounds. And as everybody watches it, I have no doubt that a number of other violent non-state actors will learn from it, and that the innovation and use and creativity there's going to be a burst of proliferation and innovation in the aftermath of this. And so that adds a special urgency to our agenda, trying to make sure that we're on the leading edge of this emerging threat, because I think we have a treatment occurring right now in the real world that's going to cause it to amp up.
Yeah, and we're in the same discussion. It's interesting that you're saying that, because he said, okay, basically right now, we're sitting in a cafe in Brussels, and he said, you and I could walk around this city, and if we wanted to, we come up with something that would be an effective armed UAV that we could basically carry out a terrorist attack on a populated center, just with the knowledge between the two of us. And I think that's what's especially interesting about this survey, is that it's reaching across the typical of the experts, the researchers and practitioners who understand it very well, but also open to a wider audience that kind of simulates this kind of perspective of a non-state actor, a violent non-state actor saying, we want to do X, we have this material, this material, this material, and we
Right.
have this person who knows a little bit of engineering, a little bit of computer programming, a little bit of fabrication. How can we bring it all together to make all these materials do B? And I think that's what's another aspect about this survey that's really important, that we get the diversity of perspectives to sort of
Yes.
understand how creative, effectively innovative people can be with the materials that exist, and highlight, underline that emerging threat that we've seen from
there's going to be a hopefully
Ukraine
a diversity of emotionality, of imagination, and of tradecraft among this larger population taking the second survey. So that's exactly why we're trying to get more people to take it, whether they're in the security world or not, in the drone world or not. It's helpful for us to have people in and out of it.
And so at the moment, we've been running this phase 2 for about 2 weeks, just under 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And if I'm also not mistaken, we're going to look to maybe extend it a little bit longer. Is that correct?
We are. We just identified a few more populations who are interested in participating in it, and so we want to grant them some time to take it. It only takes about 30 to 40 minutes, or if you're like super into it, maybe an hour, but that's at your discretion. If you're enjoying it, you can slow down and take your time. But knowing people's time is scarce and their attention is scarce, it's designed to be 30 to 40 minutes. It's all done online. And so as long as you have a computer and you have, a half-hour window, you just need to take it sometime in the next. Now we're saying it's going to end by the 27th because of these new groups that we have identified who are interested in participating.
Great. So that's the big news from us is that, one, we're extending the survey, and as you can see, we've been monitoring anyone that's in the field. You can see that there's a massive amount of innovation. Like there were 2 podcasts that came out. One had a really interesting video, and I can't confirm it, but I think it was a group like Greenpeace, and it was in the Krulak Center's podcast, and they have a video as well where they were talking about drone swarms and the threat of UAVs. And in the video, it basically showed a COTS UAV that was flown towards a nuclear facility in France, and they made a very big point of, here's this facility, flying around it and then crashing into it, and the drone was destroyed. It wasn't carrying anything, but the message was, we could if we wanted to, Yeah. And
that's happened a lot of times in the US. I think this is back in, I'm not going to get the year exactly right, but it was back in the late 2010s. There was a 2-day period where 4 commercial off-the-shelf drones were flown over the Palo Verde generating station, a nuclear station in Arizona, and it generates the vast majority of energy in that location. And so, it's a high security, high stakes facility, and these 4 drones were able to penetrate their airspace, and they just hovered and looked around and left, and then they came back the next night. And nothing nefarious ever happened, but that launched a lot of interest in how often is this happening, because they have no aerial defense at these very, sensitive locations. And a couple of scholars over at the Drive, the war zone variant of it, they found out that there had been 42 instances. This was back before 2016, back before the technology has even gotten as advanced as it is now. And there were 42 instances in the US of drones hovering and checking out nuclear power generating facilities. So actually, this is just yet another example of the same thing that's been happening for quite a long time that we're still not defending against.
Yeah, and I understand that the COS world is, like you had mentioned, there are some products or there are some devices that are potentially effective, or strategies that can be used, but it still is a very far way behind the kind of innovation that we're seeing with the unmanned systems or uninhabited systems, and how they're being used by violent non-state actors or non-state actors or non-state actors with the external support of state actors, all the different actors out there. And
I don't know how far behind the technology is. The truth is we don't really know, because the technology isn't being installed in many places where we might see the threat emerge. That's the whole point of this working group, is like figure out those locations, figure out the best solutions for them given the threat, and then network those people together so that we don't ever have to see how catastrophic it is that we don't have those things in place. I think there are a lot of counter drone solutions, a lot of good ones out there, a lot of developing ones, and we just need to be connecting them with the stakeholders who require the installations, who require those services, with the right ones. And so a lot of this is about coordination and about filling gaps without duplicating coverage, and making sure that we maintain that leading edge before the threat really cascades into society.
And I guess that underlines again the value of what we're trying to do with the War Game series, and specifically with this phase 2 of the War Game, and why participation from as many people from as many backgrounds as possible is not only value for the research, but it's also valuable for public safety, national security, international security. The list goes on and on and on.
Yes.
Because we can imagine, the more imaginative I imagine the responses are, the more diverse the threat matrix is, the better prepared that we can be. And
Yep.
when it comes to developing countermeasures.
Yep, that's the goal. Please help us.
Yes. So again, thank you, Dr. Chavez, for coming on, and for everything that you're doing. And we will be continuing the survey, and I will be sending out the emails. The notes have been sent out to various institutions, and we're asking people not to share the link online, because we also don't want any contamination by bots.
On social media, yeah.
Social media. So direct messages, are they acceptable?
Acceptable. Direct messages, email, yes. So contact us if you're interested in receiving that link, and we'll be happy to share it, and we would be really grateful for your participation.
And we look forward to giving you another weekly update, those of you who are continuing to watch us. And if you need to contact us, we have our WeThink at LinkedIn. It's just weTHINK.UAV. We have my email, which is philip.o'keefe@wethink.eu. We have our WeThink Twitter account, which is the weTHINK.eu UAV UGV Emerging Threats Working Group. The whole thing that I've said so many times that I wish I could abbreviate, but I can't. So there are many ways to contact us. We've probably sent many of you emails, and if they've ended up in spam, we'll send you more emails, or let us know, and we'll be able to send you over the link. And once again, thank you, Dr. Chavez, for coming in and for all the work that you're doing. Okay, well, I wish you all a wonderful weekend, and especially
and a happy Thanksgiving to the Americans.
That's right. I forgot about Thanksgiving again. Okay, well, take care, everyone, and thanks again. Voila.